Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, a World Alternative Media, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen, and it's convenient that he's here right now. He's a resident Norwegian here at WAM, and it's really important because Norway is looking at huge inflating bubbles both in the stock market, the housing market, and of course the dollar, the kroner, I should say rather. And starting off with this chart that we have in front of us, it's a US dollar to the Norwegian kroner. And we could see a pattern here, John, going over the years, going back to about 1992, and we see a massive crash around the 2002, 2003, and we see another rise.
No,
and
it was actually 99 to 2002, so it was through the dot-com bubble. Then in 2007 to 2000.
Yeah, I mean when it actually crashed, though. I'm not talking about.
Sorry.
Yeah. And then in 2008 we see very similar situation. Now we are going back into that territory, and we could see around the beginning of 2016 it should have crashed. However, there was a lot of manipulation involved, as always, because these central planners are out of control. They're like mad scientists trying to create currency out of thin air, and it's really begets the fall of the populace, the poverty of the populace, the debt of the populace. And John, can you go into exactly what we see here? And of course, the amount of inflation around 2016 where it peaked, and why we saw this combination of central planning and this propping up of something that's really a dead horse and should have already fallen.
Yeah, well, in Norway, it's been heavily manipulated from, you can see in 2015 when the krona kind of hit a peak in like the devaluation of the krona versus the US dollar. Yeah. It was almost at 9 again. It was peaking very similar type of peak that we saw in 2000, like in the 1999 to 2002, the dot-com bubble. And what you're seeing is the Norwegian Kroner is trying to say something here.
Yeah.
There's way too much kroner out there versus US dollars. It's very heavily devalued compared to it. And it's saying that we created a massive bubble in several parts of the economy. We talked about so many times before the housing market in Oslo, which is crazy overvalued. Mm-hmm. We haven't talked so much about the Oslo Børs, which is the Norwegian stock exchange, which is the second most overvalued in PE ratio, price earnings ratio, which means the price of the stock versus how much the companies actually earn. That predicts it's way over, it's one of the highest. They're talking about Italy going down. Mm-hmm. Well, Norway is the second highest, and number 3 is currently Britain, in how overvalued their stock market is. That's another one. And what we see is the housing market in Norway is really struggling right now.
Yeah.
We've had on some of our videos people saying, oh, it's been going down 0.8, 1%. People are sitting there, they're afraid of losing money now. While the real estate agents and everybody else that wants to have the market up is telling, oh no, don't worry, it's gonna go up, the value of your house. Don't worry at all that you bought at the top. So people are ready, and when that panic happens, it's gonna just plummet. But it's not ready yet, but it's slowly starting to go down, so it's ready for that sudden moment where everybody sells off. And of course, there's a massive amount of debt in Norway. Norway is number 3 or 4 on the world private debt to GDP ratio, which is correlated, because I've done so much research on this, versus the tax rate. All the highest tax countries in the world are at the top 10.
Of course, and of course there's a looming pension disaster in Norway. Yeah. Basically, it comes from all angles. Of course, Norway is very centrally planned, centralized. It's really state-oriented. It is a country that is very dependent on government. Unfortunately, despite the rugged nature of Norway going back centuries, unfortunately, it's become a very socialist place. And looking into that, going from the kroner, all fiat currency eventually reverts to its intrinsic value of 0. It always has, always will. And tomorrow is going to be no different than yesterday. And we have to understand that. This dependency on state is going to bring a lot of people to their knees. With the chains they revere, people have to break free from those chains and actually understand how to be independent, because you depend on the state. Well, the state depends on you depending on it. And as long as you depend on the state, they will push you further into servitude. And the greatest greatest way to push people into servitude is via the hand of debt and fear. And one debt, I mean, they shove you down that bottomless pit of debt, and you're forced to ask for a ladder up from the government and the banking system, which puts you in perfect servitude. And then they scare you into, the media scares you into following their directions, going down their paths. And then the stock market is something that people are just taught in school, invest long term in the stock market. And as Robert Kiyosaki has told us, that's a bad idea. And then just going into Robert Kiyosaki as well, I mean, your house is not an asset.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I have one question that you should ask every financial advisor out there. I've gotten so many blank faces when I ask this question when they talk about long-term strategy of investing.
Yeah.
I just ask them, how about if I retire and you get a stock market crash when I retire, what am I going to do?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just like a blank stare that you usually get back. They talk about this long term. Yeah, it's because they need you to be in there so you can make money on you, first of all. But I want to go back to Norway and why it's so overvalued.
And before you do that, I just want to mention, sorry I'm rambling so much about all these things, but there's so many angles to this story. It's hitting the people in Norway and most of the world, unfortunately, from the kroner, the creation of fiat, the centralization of the markets, government ownership of the markets, basically socialist corporatism.
They call them state capitalists.
Yeah, but it's more fascism. Exactly how the collectivist paradigm, it's just different flavors. It all comes together full circle. And, from the housing market bubbles, the stock market bubbles, people are just being used, and people are going to see incredible poverty like the world has never seen when this all comes down, and it will come down. Fundamentals are off the table due to the level of manipulation, but we know it's going to happen, so we have to be prepared, better over-prepared than under-prepared. John?
Yeah, a lot of people in Norway doesn't even have a clue that the Norwegian Kroner used to be gold and silver backed. It used to, in the late 1800s, they went away from the gold and silver standard in currency. Also, they don't know that Norway have had three or four central banks through the early 1700s all the way till today, and all of them failed, of course, miserably, where they were printed out of existence quite quickly. And we could do a little bit more. There's so much to monetary history that people forget. All these central banks that have destroyed currencies over time. Yeah. But I want to go back to the current destruction, which is the central bank, Norges Bank, which is the central bank in Norway. They have been doing so much quantitative easing through bailing out the banks that have so much bad debt on their hands. And what you've seen is their balance sheet has raised since 2008. It's almost gone up fourfold, like 400%. You also see that what is interesting, so that correlation with the stock market, when you look at the bottom in 2008, it was about 209. Well, today it's about 808, the index. So that's a 400%. So the bank balance sheets correlate exactly with the stock the stock valuation. So it's both of them are 400%. Isn't that very interesting and very intriguing idea? That what could have happened there? So
I wonder.
Well, it all comes back to the central bank is the problem. They put the interest rate down, which was way below what it should have been in Norway, and everybody just went on a debt binge, and that's why you see Norwegians are so heavily indebted on all fronts.
And this is exactly what we started off the video about when it comes to inflation. We saw that peak in February 2016, the kroner versus the US dollar, and then we saw what should have been a crash, and the crash didn't happen. And this is why you look at this peak in the inflation rate in Norway, and ever since it's been in a spiral, deflationary depression.
Well, I grew up in Norway. I lived there for 25 years, and I saw inflation when I started thinking. I didn't pay attention to it most of the time when I lived in Norway.
Most don't.
But when I look back at it, it's just insane how high the inflation has been over those 25 years that I lived there. And until today, it's several hundreds% that the krona has lost in value. And as people have, a lot of people in Norway doesn't have private investments that they have for themselves. They've been trusting the government to take care of them. And with the Norwegian oil fund having almost 70%, like 67% in equities, in holdings. The current pension chief, right after we did the video, he actually quit, the current CEO, maybe he watched our video.
Be nice, nice to think that. But John, I mean, just going into inflation, you mentioned that you didn't really notice it, and most people don't at the time. Most people, it's a hidden tax, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And people just think, well, it's normal that bread prices go from this to that and quadruple and octuple and just go up and up and up. People don't realize that this is due to the printing of the currency, and not just that, the overprinting of the currency.
Exactly.
It's not like Bitcoin. There isn't like a cap on how much can be printed. It's just unlimited. Just print. You just picture Ben Bernanke going buying like a helicopter, throwing money down.
Well, that's what he
wants.
That's a new thing that probably will come to Norway and other countries, is this helicopter money. The desperate, which is kind of the new what do they call it? The universal income. It's very similar. It's that massive drop of money. What they don't think about is, what about the people that have to support all this? The private sector that has to pay the taxes in order for that to happen.
And then can't
as the
employ
inflation
anyone.
is going up. It's just ridiculous.
It just perpetuates it.
The central banks are completely destroying countries around the world, and Norway is definitely one of them, that are on the peak of so many bubbles that are coming down as we speak. And things are going to go really bad in Norway. I talk to people, they kind of seem to not want to hear this, but it is happening. I see it. It's just textbook bubbles that they've blown in Norway. It's very much like that it was in the 80s when, unfortunately, my dad lost his company that he had at the time because of massive, suddenly the spike in interest went up to 18-19% and just eviscerated a lot of businesses in Norway. And I think we're back to that level where Norway is, trying to wind their, like, the one thing that I read about just recently was that they were going to stop investing in oil and gas, which comes from the United Nations, of course, their investment council, and so saying, we got to get the world off of that. So the oil fund, which is getting oil royalties, is going to go off of investing in oil and gas. Well, they're still getting the oil royalties, so it's kind of an oxymoron.
We recently went into the sovereign wealth fund and all that, and it's just the implementation of problem, reaction, solution, repeat, the Hegelian dialectic. And it's always been that way. And, people don't realize the amount of manipulation that goes into keeping this volatile and deadly currency from crashing like it inevitably has to do eventually. And the more they manipulate it, the more that bubble expands, the more pressure builds, and eventually that explosion becomes much worse. It's much better to blow up a propane tank that's the size of a penny than it is to blow up a propane tank the size of a building. And this is what I'm talking about. I mean, it just keeps growing and growing, and the pressure grows bigger, and that just means that the danger increases, the blast range increases, and this is not just going to affect Norway. Not only is this happening in most countries around the world, if not every country, pretty much, it's all centralized and government oriented, but it's the fact that just what's happening in Norway is going to affect other countries as well, which people just can't wrap their heads around. The fact that the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, I mean, the amount of companies around the world that it has control over and has some kind of hand in.
Yeah, it owns anywhere from 0.2 till about almost 3-4% in some companies. And when it comes to the Norwegian Oslo Børs, which is the Norwegian stock exchange, they owe a lot of that, and that's where the danger is. And what they've talked about just very recently is that massive danger in being an equity fund, basically, that is supposed to sustain the economy. I remember, I think all this distortion come from the central banks again, putting down interest rates, and people are flooding everywhere to try to find yield in order to grow their money enough. And they can't find it in debt anymore, which was a lot of sustainable debt and businesses and so. And they're moving away from that, and they're going into mass risk in the stock markets, and that's what you see all around the world. Look at the Dow Jones. Look at the European exchange. Like everywhere, you see these stock bubbles. It's just insane, and it baffles me that they can keep this going. But I think they will do whatever it takes. And you've seen that they started to buy stocks and everything. These central banks and who knows? I did an article back for not long ago that I said that the Federal Reserve will own everything and then nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just keeps building and building. And I think like the two major enemies here are the government and the central banking system, I think they might be tied because of the collusion between the two and the manipulation between the two. And then, of course, in second, I would say, is just the banking system in general, where we see this manipulation.
And
and the manipulation in the markets, collateralized debt obligations, mortgage-backed securities, and, of course, credit default swaps, all that mixture within the housing market, just the derivatives within the housing market and the stock market. The amount of manipulation by banks is really incredibly volatile and dangerous. And then, of course, there's, like you said, the central banking system, and then the government. The government regulates small businesses out of the market, regulates anyone that wants to compete and innovate out of the market. Then you have these massive monopolies that are propped up by the state through the regulatory power and taxes as well. And it's just this storm brewing from all angles. You can't find a single angle that isn't filled with some kind of manipulation and some kind of wizardry from the central banks or the government or the banking system.
I think you can call this one a central bank bubble, because that's what it is. Even if it's stock market, real estate, whatever aspect of markets it is, it's the central banks that have created this. They are the next bubble to pop. The fiat system is coming down, and we gotta prepare ourselves. I talk to so many people back home in Norway: buy gold and silver, hold money in Bitcoin because of bail-in legislation that have been put in Norway and a whole bunch of other countries. Your money's not safe in the banks. You borrow your money to the banks when you have your money into that bank account. And prepare yourself, have food available.
Well, actually, I wanted to cut in there for a second, John, because I want you to say this in Norwegian to the audience after I'm finished saying it. Just the basic solutions: food, water, shelter, self-defense, so you're not gathering things for the toughest guy in the block. Gold, silver, assets, that which is decentralized like Bitcoin. Just get yourself prepared, because it's better to be over-prepared than under-prepared.
Ja, nei, det du trenger du trenger gull, sølv og så klart og bitcoin. Og det veldig viktig å ha mat og ta vare på og ha vann for eksempel, som du kan gjøre at du kan overleve. Det som jeg har sett i Venezuela og andre land rundt omkring i verden. Og det så viktig også å beskytte seg med å ha et våpen som kan beskytte deg. Nå vet jeg at Norge veldig strenge på våpenregulering, men det veldig viktig å ta vare på seg selv og familien sin, og skjønne at det noe stort som i ferd med å skje. Og det har skjedd 4 ganger gjennom Norgeshistorien, hvor en sentralbank har gått totalt av skaftet og ødelagt økonomien. Så jeg sier til alle kjære nordmenn: la oss endre dette her. Og dette må skje, vi må ta action, og dere bør høre nå, for nå det i ferd med å virkelig sprekke en stor boble i Norge.
Exactly. Anyway, so I think we'll round it up there. Thank you very much for going into all this with us, John. And until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson and John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change. Like what you see here at WAM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon, we can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so overwhelmingly demonetized and censored by YouTube as the Anti-Defamation League comes in and flags all of our content as hate speech. You can also find me at Josh Sigurdson at steemit.com. That's steemit.com, the future of social media, where you get paid in the upvote of your post via Steem, the cryptocurrency. You can also find our Bitcoin address in the description and the comments below, as well as on the screen for you to scan if you please. And don't forget to come on down to Anarchapulco in Acapulco, Mexico in February, one of the best events of the year, and you can save money on your tickets by typing in promo code WAM. That's WAM. We'll leave the link below for you, and until next time, don't forget to subscribe. This is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.